不要看那个第8航空军有这个强大八的外号，其实它最早的外号在我看来应该叫小小八。为什么？因为它在1942年7月4日执行第一次任务的时候呢，你们猜它派了多少飞机？6架 A-20，那个属于中型的这种轰炸机，去轰炸荷兰的4座机场而已。这根本就是战术空军，不是战略空军，所以就根本就是小小八。那个时候去执行任务，还要派那个6架英国的波士顿轰炸机在旁边跟他们一起去撞弹。但是到了1944年6月，就诺曼底登陆的时候呢，你们猜它的规模到了多少呢？这个真的就是名副其实的强大八了，因为这个时候它动不动就可以派出2000架的4引擎轰炸机跟1000架的战斗机出任务。所谓的4引擎轰炸机，就是包括 B-24跟 B-17两款战略轰炸机在内。你说这个规模大不大？那你看它第一次出任务的时候，可能规模比陈纳德在中国的这个驻华航空特遣队都还要小。然后等到了这个1944年的时候，陈纳德的第14航空军在中国有500架飞机大概，那他在欧洲有8000多架飞机，这是他的16倍之多。你看到没有？这就是欧洲战场跟中国战场的这个作战规模的差异，在这个时候凸显出来了。各位，我们看这个8的 Anderson， 他真的是非常的厉害，打下16.2架敌机。但是其实你去把这个第8航空军的整个规模拿出来，它其实也只是其中一名而已。其实第8航空军在二战的时候诞生了566个击落超过5架敌机的英雄，那包括战斗机飞行员跟轰炸机上的枪手。那其中呢，有261人确实是非战斗机，就是非 P-51野马打下了超过5架以上的德国战斗机。那像 Anderson 这样子打下超过15架的有31个人，所以你们说强大吧，厉不厉害？这次回到洛杉矶啊，我们除了访问2位这个第8航空军的老英雄，我们也去造访了这个 Chino 最有名的 Planes of Fame Museum， 就是世界名机博物馆。那这个博物馆非常有名，为什么？因为它的馆藏大概有150架的飞机，都是二战、冷战的，甚至有一些是到了90年代的机种，它都有。那基本上都是原汁原味的，而且其中有30架是可以飞的。那相信喜欢日本飞机的人应该更知道，就是说那里有一架是属于原装的零战，它连发动机都是属于日本原厂设计的。那喜欢二战老飞机的人是不可错过这个博物馆的，所以我们这次一定也会去那边走一走。那这次我们也非常感谢馆方的这个 Brian 大哥向我们介绍了 B-17跟 P-51这2款跟第8航空军最有关系的轰炸机跟战斗机。那透过他的介绍，相信大家对这些 warbird 这些战鹰会有更深的了解。
Hi Brian, I'm
Hi.
Sam from Taiwan. I'd like to know if it's possible for me to introduce yourself, like what's your mission in this museum's purpose?
Sure. My name is Brian Finnegan. I'm the Director of Education Programs here at the Planes of Fame Air Museum. Planes of Fame is located in Chino, California, which is in Southern California. We're about 30-40 minutes from downtown Los Angeles or from Disneyland. We were founded in 1957. We've been at several locations, but we've been here at Chino now since 1974. We have over 100 aircraft here in the collection in Chino, and we have another 40 or so actually in storage. So about almost 140 aircraft in the collection. Out of that, 40 aircraft have been restored to flight. And so we are what would be considered a flying museum. And once a month we will fly at least one of our aircraft over the museum so that visitors can come, they can see them start up, taxi away, and then watch them as they fly overhead. The mission of the museum is to preserve aviation history, and we do that by restoring aircraft and putting them on display. We also have a large collection of artifacts and memorabilia from the various periods all the way from World War I through World War II and into the jet age. Our other mission is also to educate the public about aviation and the history of aviation, as well as even the career opportunities in aviation today. Hopefully to inspire young people in particular to look at aviation as a possible career, or to inspire them to learn more about aviation history. And then the last part of our mission is really to honor aviation pioneers by recognizing their contributions and their work, and to honor the veterans. And that's veterans of all services from all nations around the world. We have a number of events still where we bring veterans in to talk about their experiences. We offer veterans free admission on certain days. We have discounted admission for veterans. And we want the veterans to be able to tell our visitors what the experiences have been with aviation. And that also goes to some of the pioneers. There are still people in aviation who are blazing new trails, and we will have them come in and talk to people as well. So all in all, I think the museum is really a center, a resource for the public to come and see aviation history, learn more about it, and really gain, hopefully, an appreciation for the hard work that the men and women who designed and built and even flew these aircraft over.
Do you know anything about this B-17 behind you?
Yeah, so this is an aircraft from the Second World War. It was actually first designed in 1935, but really reached its heyday in the 1940s during World War II. This is a Boeing B-17, and this is a G model. So various models starting with A, B, C, D, and so this is the G model, which would have been, what, the 6th version of this. This is the type of aircraft that was used in all the theaters of World War II, but primarily in the European theater.
ETO, right?
Yeah, the ETO. And it had a crew of 10, a pilot, a co-pilot. In the nose would have been a bombardier, and also behind him would have been seated a navigator. The bombardier's job, obviously, is to operate a bomb site and to drop the bombs on the target that has been established in advance. The navigator's job is to get the aircraft to that target and then back home. The pilot, obviously, and the co-pilot fly the aircraft there. The other individuals on the aircraft would have been gunners. Their job would have been to protect the aircraft, and they would have had another job as well. So there would have been an engineer whose primary mission was to monitor the engines to make sure they're operating at full capacity. There would have been a radio operator who would have communicated with other aircraft as well as the various, inside the crew. He would have talked to the crew. There would have been 2 gunners in the middle, and we'll see where they would have worked in the waist. And there would have been a gunner in the back called the tail gunner. He's actually facing to the rear. He has 2 50 caliber machine guns, and he would attack anything that comes up from behind. And then we'll show you a little ball down at the bottom. It's called the ball turret. It could spin 360 degrees, and it had 2 machine guns, and his job was to attack anything attacking from below. They would fly typically missions that lasted 6 to 8 hours from England all the way into Germany and back. They would fly at anywhere from 28,000 to 32,000 feet, where it's minus 40 degrees below zero. So they're freezing. They're wearing heavy clothing. Some of them are even wearing electric suits, much like an electric blanket that plugs in and keeps them warm. But theoretically, if they were to take a glove off and touch the side of the airplane, it could freeze to the side of the airplane. They were young men. The average age of a B-17 crewman was 19. The average age of the officers would have been about 24. And so they were very young. They would have flown anywhere from 25 and later 30 and later 35 missions before they would have been relieved from duty. And all that meant is that they could have gone back to the United States, where they might have worked in a training capacity, or they could have signed on for another crew. Some of them even transitioned into a different type of aircraft.
That's from MIT-A, right?
Yes.
It's the Air Force, right?
Yeah, this is
Fighter
the
Bomber
Army
Group.
Air Force of World War II. So these were first designed by a company called Boeing Aircraft Company out of Seattle, Washington. There were 12,731 of them built from 1935 until 1945. And the production was so in high demand, and Boeing couldn't meet all of it. Boeing also had to build the B-29 Super Fortress. And so they subcontracted work to both the Vega division of Lockheed and the Douglas Aircraft Company in Long Beach. This aircraft was built by Douglas in 1945. It actually completed production on May 5th, 1945. And of course, the war in Europe ends on May 6th, 1945. So this aircraft never saw combat. It was put into storage after the war. And then it sat there for 5 years when it was pulled out of storage, and it was converted into an aircraft that was called a drone director. Another operator could have remotely controlled still another B-17 that was considered a target aircraft. Its first mission was to go out to the Central Pacific to an island called Enwatok, where it flew a target B-17 into a mushroom cloud during a atomic bomb test. They were testing the atomic bombs in the islands in the Pacific, and they would use the aircraft and other things to see what happens to an aircraft flying through the radioactive cloud generated it. After it finished that mission, it came back to the United States. It continued to fly other aircraft remotely for target practice, for missiles and so on. And in 1957, it was retired from service. It has the distinction of being the final B-17 aircraft flown by the United States Air Force, because in 1947, the Army Air Force became the U.S. Air Force. And it went into storage again, but very quickly it was acquired by the museum. It was flying at the time, and it went on to appear in a television series that aired here in the United States in the 1960s called 12 O'Clock High. It was based on the movie 12 O'Clock High that came out in 1949. And the television series ran for 3 years, and this was Piccadilly Lily 2, the aircraft featured in that television series. She stopped flying in the 1970s, and she's been in restoration ever since. Restoration can be a very expensive endeavor. It can take thousands of dollars and hundreds of man hours to restore an aircraft, especially one of this size. But hopefully, fingers crossed, one day this aircraft will join the other 10 aircraft that are flying, the B-17s that still fly. But we have her here. Guests can go in, and we'll take you guys in so you can see the inside. You'll see that there's certain areas like the cockpit that are not finished yet. But this is an opportunity for visitors to the museum to experience one of these aircraft up close, and to really we try to make them understand what the veterans that flew these aircraft went through. I like to use this aircraft as an example of why we say thank you to our veterans for their service, because when you understand the types of missions that the men flew in these aircraft, you realize they sacrificed a lot. Out of that 12,731 that were built, 7,500 aircraft were lost, either through combat or training accidents, but that's an awful lot, and with those, potentially 10 men could have lost their life. So the B-17 is very much a symbol as well as an interesting aircraft. So we were just looking at the B-17, and the B-17 would fly very long missions, like we said, 6 to 8 hours. But even though they had all those guns on it designed to protect it, it still wasn't enough. And so they had aircraft that flew escort along with the B-17s. Those were aircraft like the P-38 Lightning and the P-47 Thunderbolt. But mostly they were this aircraft behind me, the P-51 Mustang. This is an aircraft built here in Southern California by North American Aviation. It was designed as an escort fighter. It was very fast and very sleek. This is what's known as a P-51D. We also have in the collection a P-51A. All of our Mustangs fly. So we have flying Mustangs from a P-51A to the Ds. The Ds were the most efficient of all of them. They were fast, they had long range, and they were very powerful. They carried 6 50 caliber machine guns. And so a team of P-51s would fly alongside the B-17s, and as they encountered other fighter aircraft, the P-51s would break off and engage the German fighters in air-to-air combat. The idea was to keep the bombers on their mission and to prevent them from being shot down. And over time, it was so effective that by 1945, really beginning January of 45, there was no more air-to-air opposition from the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. They had pretty much cleaned the skies of the German Luftwaffe. The Mustang would have had a single pilot. He would have been what's known as a fighter pilot. His job would have been to use his aircraft as a traveling machine gun to try to shoot down and attack. On other missions, the P-51s would also use to strafe ground targets, to either support ground troops or to go after other installations, like even anything from a train to transportation vehicles, barges, and so on, to again try to stop the German war machine from producing armament and from succeeding. And so the Mustang pilots, the Thunderbolt pilots, the P-38 pilots of World War II in the ETO, the European theater, had a number of missions, whether it was ground support, or air-to-air combat or escort missions. And the Mustang was unique in that it had the range to go all the way from England to Germany and back. It was the only one of the P-38 couldn't do that, the P-47 did not have the range, even with excess fuel tanks. But the Mustang with additional fuel tanks could go all the way into Germany and back and escort the B-17s all the way in and all the way out. And so this is one of the aircraft that really did help turn the tide of the war in World War II in the European theater.
Maybe you can show us around B-17,
Sure.
inside and outside, walk around?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we'll start here at the tail. This is where the tail gunner would have been positioned. He would have been seated where his head would have been right here, and then he has two 50 caliber machine guns, again rear facing. This has a unique tail that allows him to go up and down and even turn slightly left and right. And so he's operating, he has a gun sight, and he's operating. Anything that's coming and approaching from the rear is his responsibility. He's also an armorer on the aircraft, so it's his job to make sure that each of the guns has enough ammunition. And so it's his job to distribute that prior to the flight, and then even from time to time during the flight, he would move ammunition around from one gun to the next. And so he would have been an enlisted man, most likely a sergeant, and he would have flown this aircraft and been in the tail for pretty much all the flight. So he would have been seated on like a bicycle seat with his knees on the ground for close to 8 hours. Not a very comfortable position. Never activated during World War II, was never assigned to a bomb group.
Yeah, so I know the D1s, the bloody 100s.
Okay, see, you know more than I do in that sense. That's great. Yeah. There's somebody in there, so why don't we just kind of go up towards the nose?
Okay, we'll go to the north.
Because you can edit out a sequence.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, I met Bud Anderson, who flew
Did you? The P-51s, yeah.
He escorted B-17.
Yeah.
He talked about Doolittle and the way they change, because usually they have bomber first. So the fighter cannot move away from bomber.
So we're actually at the nose of the B-17 here, and we see this, which is called the chin turret. This was a later addition to the B-17s. It first appears in the F model and then was standard equipment on the G model, and this again is a G. And this has two 50 caliber machine guns that would have been remotely operated by the bombardier. So he's able to protect. One of the most vulnerable spots of a B-17 was a head-on attack, and the German Luftwaffe learned that early on, that if they attacked the B-17s front on, it was most vulnerable because they could take out the bombardier and they could take out the pilots. And so these were installed in those later versions to prevent that. This put a lot of bullets, if you will, in the sky and persuaded the German pilots to stay away from the front of the aircraft. And so this was a very sophisticated piece of equipment that was added in later versions. The B-17 has 4 Wright Cyclone supercharged engines, or turbocharged engines, so it was able to fly both at low altitudes and extremely high altitudes without any loss of performance. Each engine is 1,400 horsepower, which gives it almost 4,500 horsepower as a complete engine. Its average speed was 271 miles an hour for the most part. We're now in the waist position of the B-17, and you can see here's a 50 caliber machine gun that the waist gunner would have operated. There would have been another one right here. And in the B-17G, they're staggered. In the earlier aircraft, they were opposite each other, and the two guys were constantly bumping into each other. So in this model, they moved them so they each could operate independent of one another and not get in each other's way. Each gun here would have had about 500 rounds of ammunition, and up to maybe 600. And he would have had to use it sparingly. He would have had to fire it in short bursts, kind of da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, versus just putting down the hammer and letting it go. His job really is to try to shoot at anything that's flying to the side and not hit another B-17, obviously. So we're talking about split-second reaction times, because this aircraft is traveling 300 miles an hour, and these aircraft are traveling the opposite direction, that speed. So a combined speed of 600 miles an hour, he's got to try to hit something. So he's leading it as much as possible. But really what he's doing is he's saying to the aircraft that's attacking him, I'd stay away if I were you. He's putting out a blanket of bullets that they don't want to fly into. And so that's really what their job is. It's a deterrent to try to prevent someone from flying into it. Here we see the ball turret from inside the aircraft. This is how the ball turret operator would have gotten into the aircraft. When the aircraft takes off, he would have been seated up in the radio compartment, and then at one point, shortly after takeoff, they would have turned the ball, so the door, he would have climbed in, and then he would have turned the ball, so now he had full electric operation of that Sperry ball turret. And he's in there again for a period of 6 to 8 hours in a very cramped position. We'll take a look at that from the outside. Moving around this way, so this is the radio compartment of the B-17, and this is where the radio operator would have sat. His job is to communicate with the other aircraft and to communicate and make sure all communication is open for the crew to talk on the interphone between one another. So he's in constant communication with the pilot, the bombardier, the navigator, and the gunners, who are all on throat microphones, and he's monitoring all of that. And then he's also talking to neighboring aircraft. And if there's changes in the mission, he's relaying those changes. Changes might have had everything to do with a disabled aircraft having to pull out and another aircraft moving up into that position, and he would then announce that to the rest of the crew. And sometimes it would have involved his aircraft taking a new position within the flight. There would have been typically 18 aircraft in a bomb squadron, and each mission might have had as many as 10 different squadrons flying. So you would have had 180 aircraft at a single time. There were missions that were even larger than that. So they flew in large packs, they flew in formation, tight formations, for very long extended periods. And so it was very tedious, it's very cold, and it's very dangerous because there are people trying to shoot at them at all times. Right behind me here is the bomb bay. This is where the bombs would be, and this is where the bomb bay doors would be opened by the bombardier, and then using the Norden bomb sight, he would have set his target. The Norden bomb sight would have then controlled the aircraft's movement to the target and would have activated the bombs at the correct time so that they hit the target. It's a calculation that the bombardier would have been making with the bomb sight, using it as a computer to basically calculate airspeed, wind direction, speed of wind, and even the aircraft's trajectory to the target, and at what point they expected the type of bomb they were carrying to actually hit the target. And all of that would have been factored into the Norden bomb sight, and then it would have determined at what point to drop the bombs so that they would be as close to the target as possible. The United States operated what they called strategic bombing, which was to attack Germans' ability to make war, Germany's factories, their military installations, their transportation corridors, their communications lines. The Americans operated during the daylight in what they called daylight precision bombing, using the Norden bomb sight and skilled bombardier and skilled crewmen. Their attempt was during daylight hours to fly when they could be seen and be shot at, both from ground attack through anti-aircraft fire as well as other aircraft flying by, but to fly and challenge that to try to hit those targets as precisely as possible. The British, the RAF, flew a different strategy. They used nighttime as cover, and they did more of what we call blanket bombing. They would target population centers, and theirs was more what we would today call terror bombings. It was to try to destroy the morale of the German people by never knowing if a bomb was coming their way, coming to their town or village, coming to their home in particular. And so the combination of daylight precision bombing by the United States and carpet bombing at night by the Royal Air Force worked in favor of the Allies in terms of both knocking the Germans' ability to wage war and also working against their people in the ability to stay in the war. And so those two things in combination really help to turn the tide again in the European theater. Once we have control of the air, thanks to the P-51 Mustangs and the P-47s and the P-38s, once we have that control of the air, then it's really just a matter of to pound and pound and pound away at Germany until ultimately in May of 1945, Germany surrenders. And so this, again, this type of aircraft plays a very key role in that. This aircraft, along with another big heavy bomber called the B-24 Liberator, a little more automated in terms of its control. It uses hydraulic controls versus the manual controls we see on this aircraft. But those two aircraft in tandem really working together to pound targets that were to prevent Germany from being able to produce armament, to produce weapons, and really to hit their troops hard in that regard. So this is the ball turret. There would have been an individual called the ball turret gunner who would have been inside this small little ball. And this is an automated ball. It was made by the Sperry Corporation, and it could travel in a completely 360-degree circle. He has two 50 caliber machine guns, and he's in a very tight configuration, almost like a fetal position, if you will. He's laying on his back against this door, and then the guns are pointing that way, and he has a window, and he's spinning around, and he's shooting at anything that's coming up from below. That's really his job. Imagine being in this position in this little ball for a 6 to 8 hour mission, and you realize just how difficult this was. The ball turret gunner typically was short in stature. They were the shorter individuals, probably in the range of 5'4" to 5'6". The bigger guys tended to be in the other positions, and they had very little protection on their own. They were not. He has a lot of plexiglass, and he doesn't really have much plating to protect him from bullets. So he's in a very vulnerable position. He could not be in the ball during takeoff and landing because it wouldn't be safe. But he was in there the rest of the mission. And so again, the ball turret gunner plays a critical role in the B-17's history, and it was one of the last times we see this particular aircraft. Is one of the last times we see a ball turret on any aircraft. Most of the times after this, we'll go to automated guns where there's not a person operating them in the immediate vicinity. They're operating remotely. So this is the B-17. Again, this particular aircraft is under restoration, and we continue to work on it, and we continue to add new enhancements and new features to give our visitors an experience. What we want them to appreciate is both what went into the design of this aircraft, what went into the missions that it flew, and really the courage and bravery and sacrifices that the men who flew these missions did on behalf of preserving freedoms around the world. And for that, we're very pleased to bring those stories to our visitors, to make them remember that there is a reason why we thank our veterans, and there is a reason why we say that a veteran deserves our praise, because what they do is sacrifice so that we can enjoy the freedoms that we sometimes take for granted. And so aircraft like this help remind us of that and kind of keep it in the forefront of our minds that we owe a debt of gratitude to the men and women who serve our countries and protect us from harm.
在1940年的2月20号到2月25号这5天的时间，发动了一个叫大礼拜的空袭，英文叫做 Big Week， 是美国的陆军的第8航空军、第9航空军、第15航空军跟第12航空军联合这个英国皇家空军的轰炸机司令部，也是不间断的对这个德国的这个航空工业发动了空袭。表面上是去炸这些飞机工厂，其实它的目的不是那么简单，它是要吸引德国的战斗机起飞，再把它们一举消灭掉。那参加大礼拜的飞行员里面，我这边就不得不提一个最有名的人，他叫做 James H. Howard，Jim Howard， 他的中文名字叫侯华惠。为什么他有中文名字呢？因为他是在广东出生的，他是一个传教士的小孩啦。那他在那个抗战爆发后，因为同情中华民国，曾经自愿的来中华民国参加美籍志愿大队，就是我们所俗称的飞虎队，在第2中队服务，也是一个很有名的这个王牌飞行员了。那后来他在1942年7月4日，也就是 AVG 解散之后呢，他就回到了美军体系里面，后来被分发到欧洲战场参加这个第354战斗机大队。那第354战斗机大队严格来讲是属于第9航空军的，但第9航空军在那个时候是最早在欧洲接收野马战斗机的部队。那一开始包括巴德安森服务的357大队都是在第9航空军之下，甚至侯华惠因为他们是最早接收 P51的，所以他还要去训练巴德安森他们怎么样执行 P51的作战任务，所以他还带过357大队，这是非常有趣的一段。那侯华惠他最有名的一个案例在欧洲战场上，就是他驾驶他的 P51， 他的 P51外号叫顶好，就是中文的顶好2个字，那英文叫丁浩。他在1944年1月11日的时候，曾经单枪匹马的保护一整群的这个 B-17轰炸机，去对抗30几架试图来拦截这些轰炸机的德国战斗机。那他那次 英勇作战，一个人就吓跑了30几架德国飞机，所以因此他得到了一个外号叫做一人空军 （One Man Air Force），还得到了这个国会荣誉勋章的表扬。他好像也是欧洲战场上唯一一个得到国会荣誉勋章的战斗机飞行员，所以这个故事也是非常有意思，告诉我们说，中华民国跟这个欧洲战场不是完全没有这个联系的，还是有的。那这个大礼拜的任务，表面上呢是说要去轰炸德国的飞机工厂，其实就是要吸引德国的战斗机，比方说像 BF-109啊、FW-190啊、BF-110等战斗机起飞来拦截他们，然后再用野马把他们统统干掉。那这个大礼拜真的对德国空军而言是伤其筋骨的，因为他们有262架飞机被击落了。那死掉的飞行员加空勤人员有250人，其中100人是他们的战斗机飞行员，基本上是都是最有经验跟最善战的飞行员，在这5天之内就被消灭殆尽了。也就是说，第8航空军还有整个美国陆军航空部队在欧洲的这4个航空军联合起来，让德国空军领教到了什么叫战略轰炸的威力跟护航战斗机的威力。那自此之后，欧洲战场制空权就慢慢的转入了这个英美盟军的手里了。相信大家在听完 Larry Stevens 跟 Bud Anderson 的战时经验，还有这个 Brian 先生对 B-17还有 P-51的介绍之后，大家对2战的第8航空军的故事有更深刻的了解。那么大家对后来的第8航空军的故事是不是也想要知道一下呢？就让我跟大家做一个简单的介绍吧。第8航空军在欧洲的任务基本上随着德国在1945年5月的投降就宣告结束了。本来他是要到亚洲支援对日作战的，但是因为日本投降的太快了，那他基本上没有来得及参与，日本就被2颗原子弹给炸到投降了。那所以2战就这样结束了。可是到了冷战时代之后呢，苏联跟美国都进入了这个核子竞赛的阶段。那第8航空军作为战略飞行部队，主要的任务就是在这个李梅将军指挥的 Strategic Air Command， 就是战略航空司令部之下，对苏联实施核子打击。但是美苏双方又不敢真的把战争升级到核战的规模，所以基本上在整个冷战时代，第8航空军还是支援战术任务为主。那我们也知道，那个冷战时代的2大美国参加的热战、韩战跟越战都发生在亚洲，所以那个时代第8航空军的任务都是在亚洲为主。比方说在韩战的时候，他曾派过1个连队的这个 F-84到战场上去护航那个 B-29轰炸机，然后到了越战的时候呢，他也以 B-52轰炸机去支援美国跟南越部队围剿越共战争，叫湖光行动。还有他也对北越做了一些轰炸，就是所谓的这个后卫行动。那基本上到了冷战结束之后，这个 SAC 也解散了，但他还是会支援一些对抗一些流亡国家的任务，比方说像波湾战争他也参加了，然后还有后来的这个科索沃的战争，去轰炸塞尔维亚的首都。那一次那个他也是派了 B-2第一次上战场，也是第8航空军派的。那这个对南斯拉夫的行动也是第8航空军在战后第一次回到欧洲战场，是非常值得我们关注的一个历史性时刻。那么从2010年开始，第8航空军就隶属于这个美国的全球打击司令部之下。那现在你们所有能想到的美国战略轰炸机，从这个 B-52开始到 B-1 再到 B-2，通通都是第8航空军指挥。那相信未来 B-21服役之后，也有很大的概率是由第8航空军指挥。所以第8航空军的任务还是任重道远啊。尤其现在我们的这个世界越来越不平静了。你看俄罗斯在乌克兰发动侵略战争，亲门踏户，像当年的纳粹一样，直接想要去并吞一个国家。那中共也在蠢蠢欲动。相信第8航空军未来在维持这个全球的和平方面，还会继续跟他在2战的时候一样，扮演关键的作用。谢谢大家。